So good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I appreciate everyone taking the time to take part in this. Welcome to the Greater Kitchener-Waterloo Chamber of Commerce Candidate Forum for the riding of Kitchener Centre. The format for the event will be 1-minute introductory remarks from each candidate, followed by questions in priority areas identified by the Greater Kitchener-Waterloo Chamber of Commerce through their advisory committees and responses from the membership at large. The questions will be asked in rotation, and I, the moderator, reserve the right to terminate answers where appropriate. At the conclusion of the debate, each candidate will be allowed 1 minute for closing remarks, which will proceed in reverse order from opening remarks. We'll now commence the 60-second opening remarks. The candidate order, as determined alphabetically by the surname, is Mary Hennon Thorne from the Conservative Party of Canada. I don't see her in attendance today, so we'll move on to the next. So that would be Mike Morris from the Green Party Canada.
Thanks, James. Hello, I'm Mike Morris. I came to our community to study at Laurier almost 20 years ago, and I stayed to start Sustainable Waterloo Region in the years that followed. Dating back to the 2019 election, I've spent almost 3 years now listening to the priorities of our neighbors, of those on the front lines, and local experts, hearing about the need for us to be addressing the unaffordability of housing, whether we're thinking about those who are unsheltered, young people who are looking to get into the housing market for the first time, or seniors on fixed incomes. The need for truly universal healthcare, whether it relates to our eyes or our teeth, the need for mental health supports and meaningful reforms to long-term care, and the need to follow the science on climate change, ensuring we've got a good climate future for our kids. Having come in second last time, I know we're now positioned to win, ready to put our community ahead of any political party. Looking forward to this conversation. Thank you again.
Thank you, Mike. We'll move on to Bizan Zubi from the NDP.
Hi, my name is Bisan Zubi. I'm the NDP candidate in Kitchener Centre, and it is really great to be here in this forum to let you find out more about me. I live in downtown Kitchener with my rescue dog, Luna. I am a social responsibility consultant. I work with local nonprofits, and I help them and their leadership work on plans to become more responsible to the community, to the global infrastructure that we are working within, and also through sustainability measures. I moved to KW from Ottawa to start work at CG, which is the Centre for International Governance Innovation. I then went on to work at Communitech, where I was the Community Relations Manager. That's where I was responsible for over $100,000 in community sponsorships that went from the tech community into the nonprofit sector here locally. I also was, lead on different initiatives to get tech workers more involved in philanthropy, in volunteerism and local partnerships through programs like Pitch In, which was our volunteer pitch competition, as well as the Tech for Good initiative that premiered at the True North Conference in 2018. In 2018, I also ran for regional council after only living here for 2.5 years. And despite at the local level running against two 20-year incumbents, I earned over 5,000 votes my very first time running an independent campaign. I currently am working with local organizational leaders and visionaries to try and figure out where we can go as a community together. What I want to try and do with this opportunity is talk to you about the things that we can do to create action now. I am running because we have had a very, very tough year. 2 years even. Since 2019, so much has changed for me, and I'm sure it's changed for you. I was rent evicted from my home of 5 years just this January, and a couple weeks ago I saw it listed for twice the rent that I was paying. The housing crisis needs people who have lived it and experienced it, advocating against it. I'm also a small business owner, and I have been since I left Communitech to start my own consulting company. I know how hard it is to make it through and make it in this business situation for small business owners. And so I really want to work on opening that field up for especially racialized small business owners, women small business owners, so that we can all take advantage of new opportunities together. I'm proud to be running side by side with an amazing team of candidates across the country for the NDP under the leadership of Jagmeet Singh. And I know what I'm hearing at the doors when I am knocking on them. And I'm hearing people really, really excited about the NDP's chance in this election. Many people are voting NDP before they even find out that I'm the candidate and that I'm the one knocking on their doors. So I'm here to tell you about the opportunities that we have in this election to vote for change, but change that can be done and an action-oriented kind of change. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the opening remarks. We'll move now to the question portion of the event. So Mike Morris will answer the first question and the previous rotation will continue. Then concluding remarks will be in reverse order. When it comes to the first question, this is from the list that I'd mentioned right from the get-go from the Greater Kitchener Chamber of Commerce. So what is the priority local issue for the residents of the riding where you are seeking election in September of 2021? Mike?
Sure, James, thanks. Yeah, I would say what I'm hearing and so much of this I heard in 2019, whether it was around the concerns around housing, those that are renting or those that are looking to buy a home for the first time, whether it's around, the concerns around long-term care, the concerns around climate. And then in the time since, it's only gotten worse at a time when, rents and house prices up, 35% in the last year alone, when income has been stagnant. And so we need to be doing so much more on each of these. And when it comes to housing, we need to be ensuring that homes are for people first and not just commodities that investors trade. And if we were to do that, we'd be looking at a whole suite of options across the federal, municipal, and provincial governments, and really working across party lines to get it done. A host of ideas, whether we look at things like a vacancy tax, if someone is buying a home just to speculate on it and take that house out of the market and leaving it empty, well, let's maybe incentivize them to put that home back on the market. Co-op housing. I lived in a housing co-op myself for many years, and it is dignified, affordable, quality housing. Our federal government stopped investing in it back in the 80s. And now decades later, we wonder why there's not enough good quality, affordable housing stock. And so, James, certainly housing is I would say the highest priority across our community. It is key as a social determinant of health. It's the largest budget item for most across our community. And then also we've got so many folks, waiting with a parent waiting. And I spoke with a woman just a few days ago. Her mom's been waiting for 3 months in hospital for a long-term care bed. That is completely unacceptable. And I'd heard so many stories about long-term care, like I said, years ago. Well, it's only gotten worse. And again, there's so much our federal government could be doing to put standards in the Canada Health Act, for example, to eliminate the wait lists, to look at actually increasing the pay for PSWs so that we ensure that those in long-term care are getting, 4 hours of care a day and not the 4 minutes I'm hearing from some folks. And we can pay for these things. Recently, a Green MP put forward a motion to look at, adding these kinds of reforms to long-term care. And it wasn't cheap. It was a $13.7 billion investment. But we also know that our current government is subsidizing fossil fuels at $18 billion a year. So my sense is we can find the money to prioritize the things we really do care about. And then, of course, in addition, at a time when our emissions are rising the fastest in the G7, at a time when we continue to be looking at building and scaling out additional pipelines over old growth forest, folks right across our community are unified in calling out for climate action that matches the science. And, having been one of those folks that was part of writing our community's first climate plan, 15 years ago, recognizing that we need more leadership from the federal government to follow the science on climate change. And as we do that, creating good jobs at the same time when it comes to retrofitting buildings and improving the grid and all of the rest. So those are some of them. Of course, the opioid epidemic is another, as we have, 380 preventable deaths in our community. I'll be brief here, knowing there's time for other questions, and I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you, Mike. B-San, it's the same question. What's the priority local issue for residents of the riding where you're seeking election in September of 2021?
Yeah, definitely. So when we've been knocking on doors, housing has been the number one concern, but the way housing has been impacting people has been really, really different, right? So if you're talking to people who are living on disability or OAS, they're barely making enough in their payments to pay for rent when these are supposed to be sustaining, a quality of life that a world that isn't built for them to be able to be fully active in. That's what those payments are supposed to be, compensating. So housing and the way housing is kind of manifesting in people's lives has been really, really different. I also know that when it comes to rent evictions, my personal experience with one taught me that not only is the process really opaque, it's really hard to kind of navigate. And even with my privileges and even with the access that I had to, support, I still found it extremely traumatic. And so rent evictions are happening all the time in our region. We have a displacement problem that has been cataloged by the Social Development Center and other local nonprofits of people being pushed out of being able to afford homes in our area. I know I've spoken to many of my friends, all of us young professionals in our early 30s, trying to figure out if we can even afford to build our roots in Kitchener because of the way housing prices have just skyrocketed in the last year. If you can look at our housing prices and see that we have gone up by $200,000 a year in the average house of the average price of a house in our riding, you can't see that and not call that a crisis. You can't see that and not realize that those have serious implications on our economy, on our future, on our children's future, on our ability as a region to attract talent and to maintain them and retain them here. We have been, I'm speaking from, having worked in the tech sector, we have been touting the affordability of this region as one of the main draws for, getting that talent to come from all over the world, be it from Silicon Valley, be it from India. We have been telling people, come here and you can afford to have a life for your family. You will get a great salary and it's so affordable to live here. If that's not the case anymore, we have lost potentially a large skills pool that we have been relying on. So we need to look at housing as the deep kind of problem it is, and not just about, people who need affordable housing. We all require housing in order for our society to work, because housing is a human right. Having a roof over your head is a human right, and we need to be defending that here. I have the exciting news that the NDP has a plan and the ability to address these challenges. We are going to be forming, if I'm just reading the tea leaves, if we're looking at a minority government position, the NDP will be in the power to actually influence serious decisions when it comes to these types of housing decisions. So you want to be able to have Kitchener Centre's voice in that balance of power, making really important decisions about issues like housing and the way it intersects throughout our entire community.
Okay, thank you. If there's no other, discussion points here, then we can move on to the next question. So for question number 2, do you support in principle the implementation of a proof of vaccination program for non-essential businesses? And Bisan, we'll start with you first with that one.
I think that businesses have the right to keep their employees safe and ensure what they are, their kind of safety, their responsibilities are being met. In order to do that in this new reality within a pandemic, they need to be able to ask people if they are vaccinated. I know we had to have that conversation with our team when we were putting together our team of volunteers to make sure that when we were knocking on, folks' doors, when we were going into businesses, that we weren't going to be, or we were doing our very best to ensure the safety and the protection of our community. We have rapid test kits in the office. I take a rapid test kit every morning. These are the things that I'm doing, not because they're fun, not because I enjoy them, not because I want to have to do them forever, but because I know that they're the bare minimum that I can do in order to keep our community safe and ensure that our stores and businesses and nonprofits and social services and all the really essential parts of our society that, you know, help vulnerable people and make sure that people aren't excluded and their voices are heard. So those really important groups can get to their work, get back to their work in the proper ways and really be able to, you know, reopen fully. We haven't yet, and we know that. So these are the measures that we need to take, or we need to be allowed to have, in order to keep growing and coming back as a, you know, as an economy, as a community, but as one that, you know, really protects the safety of others and focuses on the vulnerable in our community, because that is really who we should be centering at the principle of all of our political decisions.
Okay, thank you. And Mike, same question to you. Do you support in principle the implementation of a proof of vaccination program for non-essential businesses?
Yes, I do. And I think it's also important to start by recognizing that, yes, you know, this is a difficult conversation for a lot of folks. And I think it is important to be respectful and, you know, hear out, you know, there's people in our community who are quite concerned about vaccines for one reason or another. And so I think while being respectful and hearing those views, I also want to be very clear that we know that vaccines work, that vaccines are a critical tool alongside wearing masks and social distancing. And so for that reason, I, of course, have been vaccinated twice, and you know, even wear a pin when going to doors to make clear with folks that that's the case. And you know, it adds up to, you know, the challenges alongside hosting an election in the midst of a pandemic. But certainly, to answer the question, yes, I think it's absolutely a critical piece of ensuring, as Bisan was sharing, that we keep folks safe. Vaccines are an important tool for doing so. And so ensuring that, you know, if someone's going to make that choice to frequent a bar or a restaurant, that then they have the option of either ensuring that they are vaccinated, or a medical exemption is currently in the provincial legislation. And also wanting to ensure that that is an accessible approach. And I have heard some concerns about QR codes, for example, that some may not have access to a smartphone for. And so do want to ensure that it's done in an accessible way, recognizing it is provincial legislation. But to answer the question, absolutely yes, I do think vaccines are critical. One of many tools as we move through this pandemic, ensuring our kids stay in school, ensuring we move on to deal and address the mental health impacts, for example, another priority that was, you know, a real challenge for a lot of folks in our community before the pandemic, and even more so and exacerbated now. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. What is your plan to continue support to small business during the remainder of the pandemic and beyond? And would you support higher business taxes? And Mike, we'll start with you on that question.
Yeah, we've got to recognize what a challenging time this has been for small businesses over the past year and a half, you know, all of which, or so many, most of which were following all of the pandemic rules, right? They were following public health protocols. And, you know, early on in the pandemic, some might remember that, you know, rent subsidy, for example, was only provided through a landlord. So there's many small businesses in our community who didn't have access to that rent subsidy, for example, because their landlords may not have applied, and yet they still weren't able to have the revenue that they may have had prior to the pandemic. And so we've got to recognize what a challenging time this has been for small businesses across our community. And as the MP for Kitchener Centre, would want to continue. There's a, you know, I have had a number of conversations with small business owners over the last number of months to be listening to what are their priorities specifically, what kind of support, what kind of advocacy do they need? And that's, again, you know, having the chamber in our community as a very clear, strong voice to be advocating alongside small businesses is so critical. As our MP, I'd want to be listening to the chamber and listening to small businesses. You asked about the tax rate specifically, James. Absolutely no interest in raising, you know, the small business tax rate at the 9% that it's currently at. That's one of the ways we can be ensuring that we're not overburdening small businesses. Just look at the downtown, right? the number of small businesses we've lost in the downtown as a result of this pandemic, and in uptown as well. You mentioned corporate taxes there. I do want to, be honest in answering that question. Our corporate tax rate in this country is the lowest in the G7. It continues to be 6 points below the US, our largest trading partner. And at a time when in the last number of years and decades, income taxes have only gone up while corporate taxes have gone down, to the point where the revenues for our Canadian government are 3 times from personal income taxes what they are from corporate tax. And so I think the idea of, taxing large corporations, at least in alignment with our largest trading partner, is something that should be considered as we then look to be honest and pragmatic with folks about then those are the revenues that could then ensure we close the social safety net. Speaking as Bisan and I both were earlier on housing, and being honest about some of the ways we could actually work towards paying for that. But again, going back to your original question, ensuring we are champions and an advocate alongside small business owners across our community, to me, is absolutely critical.
Thank you. Bisan, the same question for you. What is your plan to continue to support small business during the remainder of the pandemic and beyond? And would you support higher business taxes?
So as a small business owner, it has been really important to me to also listen, but at the end of the day, listening only goes so far. And I want to know about the plan, like what the plan of action will be. So that's what I'm hearing from small business owners. And that's what I'm really, really proud that the NDP has right now, between capping credit card fees at 1% to make sure that credit cards aren't gouging our small businesses anymore, from making sure that employees have access to sick leave, paid sick leave, and as well as making sure that they have pharmacare, which will save employers an average of $600 a year just in terms of benefits. Let's talk about the cost of cell phones and internet access. The NDP has promised to look at creating a crown corporation that would regulate and make sure that our prices across Canada were affordable at a level of access, so that everybody was able to have high speed, accessible internet access at home, no matter if they're in a rural area or an urban area like ours. And we also want to work and make sure that it's easier for you to export and reach foreign markets. As a small business owner, as an entrepreneur, there are so many barriers to that access right now. I know that through my work at Communitac, that we've only started kind of scaling solutions for. So making sure that small businesses just get a point of contact, a human being that is assigned to them through the CRA as a point of contact in the export foreign market division, is a really, really helpful addition to small business owners' abilities. At the end of the day, it's a really hard world out there for small businesses. We know that the majority of businesses this size will not survive. We know that scaling is, the odds are stacked against us. And the NDP is the party that can actually bring that self-propelled entrepreneurial kind of culture to the House of Commons, but in an equitable way, in an inclusive way that looks at who hasn't been able to open a small business and why, and and really actually making changes and creating a more equitable system. So I'm really proud to both be representing our party and small business owners in this debate.
Thank you. On to the next question. Do you support universal pharmacare, and what is the estimated cost to the taxpayer? And Bisan, we'll start with you on that question.
Yeah. So I do support universal pharmacare. I am hearing some very devastating stories knocking on doors, constituents calling us, telling us between the cost of housing going up, their disability payments or GIS or OAS payments shrinking, and the rising cost of everything, they're having to make the decision between groceries and taking their prescriptions. I heard from a woman who has decided to only take her medicine once every other day because she simply can't afford it at the dose that was prescribed. I know people who have diabetes, who are paying hundreds of dollars for both insulin and the equipment needed to manage and track that disease. These are all healthcare. These are all crucial parts of our healthcare system that are going unfunded. It is so important for us to come together and decide what we believe about healthcare, because if we value universal healthcare, then how can we have healthcare without pharmacare, without the ability to prescribe medicines to cancer or transplant patients that will, make sure that they don't reject an organ that was transplanted. For example, a transplant patient will have to be on prednisone for the rest of their lives. How is that going to be taken on by somebody that doesn't have insurance? Those costs are suffocating Canadians in our community. We know that pharmacare is going to be an investment, the same way healthcare was an investment, but that investment has paid off, and so too will this one. For pharmacare, it'll cost about $10 billion. That is the bucket that the NDP has allocated for the provinces to access in order to implement pharmacare very quickly. We're looking at a start date of 2022, so 1 year from taking office. After that would create, it would save families with private coverage $550 on average every year, $600+ to employers, and a system-wide average savings of $4.2 billion. When we forget about the implications of people not being able to have access to the medication they need, that is a huge cost on our society. And that cost does not go unnoticed or unspent. So having these preventative social safety nets, like access to prescriptions when you need them, are just an essential part of having a healthy economy and having a healthy group of people in our community. So I'm definitely in favor of pharmacare. I do believe that the investment is well worth it.
Thank you. And Mike, same question for you. Do you support universal pharmacare, and what is the estimated cost to the taxpayer?
Not only do I support it, James, but I've been advocating for it for years. We spoke about this in the 2019 election. I heard about it from so many of our neighbors who described, the difficult decisions between whether they could afford the pharmaceuticals that they need and, the cost of housing and groceries and all the rest. And so it's, to me, such an important priority because, again, we talk about universal healthcare in this country. And yes, we're proud that in some ways there is some healthcare coverage. And pharmacare is a classic example where governments have time and again promised that universal pharmacare would be provided. And still to this day, it has not been. And so I said it back in 2019 many times. Our current incumbent MP had said the same thing at the time. Other parties have put legislation forward trying to move it ahead. And our government has not voted in support of doing so. It's why I've been writing in the record about this over the past number of years, having had the experience of meeting the folks in our community that need the advocacy, that need the support, that need the truly universal health care that we know that we need to be working towards, and pharmacare being a really critical part of that. And so back to your question in terms of the costing, I've seen variations from the one you just heard of a $10 billion up to $32 billion is one of the more recent estimates I've also seen. But again, when it comes to budgets, we always find the funding for the things that we care about most. Budgets are really just about priorities and about, again, when buying in bulk, the savings, and that's often not talked about alongside the savings that can be had when buying in bulk. And so for all these reasons, because it's a more compassionate approach, because our neighbors have been calling out for it for years, because it can be done cost effectively, because we know we can shift the resources we need and reallocate towards the priorities of our neighbors. This is why I have been and will continue to, and as the MP for Kitchener Centre, would continue to be an advocate in Ottawa for truly universal healthcare, which pharmacare would be a part of.
Mike, sorry, does your party have an estimated cost of how much national pharmacare would cost the taxpayer if you were to form government and implement that?
Yeah, so the Green Party platform having come out yesterday can direct folks to there's talk of establishing the Canadian Drug Agency in 2022 in order to follow through on pharmacare. There's no cost in that platform. However, I'll go a step further. Let's be honest. Greens are not going to form government after this election. What actually will happen, more than likely, is there will be a minority government of some kind. And as the MP for Kitchener Centre, not concerned about what color the governing party might be, would want to be working with and alongside MPs from across the country to be an advocate and a voice for our community in Ottawa that recognizes that pharmacare is part of universal healthcare, and for that reason would want to, again, work with others to actually make it happen.
Okay, thanks, Mike. And Bisan, same question to you. Do you support, or I think we already. Yeah, sorry.
And we actually had a costed budget, so
Right.
that was good.
Yeah, sorry, I just on the next one now. Next question: what are your ideas for addressing the housing crisis, ownership and rentals in Waterloo region? And Mike, we'll start with you on that one.
Yeah, thanks for the question, James. As I was sharing earlier, recognizing that housing is such a critical priority across our community, recognizing that it is, as I shared, a social determinant of health, recognizing that if someone is unhoused, we're not offering that person a quality and dignified way of life in our community. The affordable housing waitlist, being on the board of Kitchener Housing and on leave, of course, now, but recognizing that the addition of rent to geared income housing is not in our community right now. The waitlist for the average wait time for a 1-bedroom apartment is up to 8 years. Can you imagine what it would feel like and what kind of life to live while you're on that wait list for that amount of time? Over 300 people, 365 was the most recent estimate. And of course, that's even just an estimate, not knowing those that might not be part of that estimate, of those that are unsheltered in our community. Those that are renting and holding on because they know this is the only place. If they were to move, their rent would go up, upwards of 50%. Again, seniors on fixed incomes, as they're seeing their rents rise and thinking, where else can I turn when at a time when OAS and GIS are just not sufficient. And so these are the reasons why I would be an advocate for our community on housing. And I think to your question, it's important to move past the rhetoric and into specific policies. And so I can offer a few, having spoken to local housing experts over the last year. I've offered, a number of ideas, whether it comes to, as I shared earlier, a vacancy tax being one option, looking at the blind bidding process and, recognizing that every time a home sells on any street in our community, that the blind bidding process only further sets a higher and higher benchmark than for every other home on that street. Looking at deep investments, we need federal investments in public and subsidized and co-op housing to ensure that then, municipalities like the City of Kitchener can then look at using surplus land for building the number of units that we know we need to add to the supply of housing. Looking at advocating alongside provincial counterparts to expand the opportunities for municipalities to use inclusionary zoning, for example, to require developers to have a minimum number of affordable units, across the city. Right now, inclusionary zoning is limited to within 800 meters of a rapid transit station. And so, there's some ways that our municipalities' hands are tied to some extent. And so would want to be working across all levels of government and across all parties to be moving forward. And I'm not ideological either. If other folks have other ideas that would allow us to ensure that rather than simply commodifying housing, that we shift towards a market that is designed where homes should be for people. These are a few of the options and would certainly be open to other ideas to continue to move forward to ensure that we have a market that is under control again, where our federal government has really abdicated their responsibility over the last number of years. Those that are in core housing need have only increased, co-op housing being one example of a solution that we know works and that we ought to have, and that as our MP, I'd be advocating for in Ottawa to get back to investing in the kind of housing that we need.
Thank you, Mike. And Bisan, same question for you. What are your ideas for addressing the housing crisis, ownership and rentals in Waterloo region?
It is definitely a crisis. I have been personally affected by it, but I am so far from, alone in that. I remember Maria, who I knocked on her door last week. She lives in downtown Kitchener near the market, and she has been told her house, her home of over 20 years is now being sold. Maria does not speak English. She speaks Portuguese. That is her main language, but she was able to, communicate this story to me, that she is waiting on family reunification. She is not sure what would happen if she lost her primary address, and she's not sure where she would be able to go. These are long-term residents of our community that are being just totally traumatized by the fact that we have lost sight of housing as a human right, and we've let the market and profit really dictate our access to, having a roof over our heads. I know that we have a lot of work to do, but the fact is that that work needs to begin right now. We can't wait for the Green Party to get together a caucus that's big enough to actually advocate for us, when we can have the NDP federally working with provincial counterparts to get housing money into our communities quickly. The NDP's policies on this, our ideas are really clear, and they're just first steps, but we can do them now. They are actionable with our caucus and with our team and Jagmeet Singh. We're talking about rent relief for renters. You know that the average cost of rent keeps going up, but I don't think many people have had their paychecks go up in similar ways. The NDP has promised up to $5,000 in tax credits to people who over 30% of their salary or their income is going towards rental costs. I even think that's too high. I want to try and work within the party when I'm elected to get that to be a lower rate, because 30% of all of your income going towards housing is a huge, huge chunk of people's budgets. And we know that it's much over 30% in this community. It goes to 35, 40, even 50% of people's income is being spent on rent. And the problem with that is that young people today are not seeing themselves in the housing market. I know personally, I was considering buying a house just a couple of years ago. Now that is impossible for me to afford. I simply cannot afford to purchase a home as it stands in, we're in my community. There's a lot of people who are my age who are in exactly the same boat. And I'm thinking of children and grandchildren, because I want them to stay and I want them to find this community to be their home as well. So when we're working on housing, we're also thinking about other non-market-based solutions. So of course, cooperative housings are amazing. I actually am lucky enough to have found a roommate in a co-op. So I currently live in cooperative housing and can speak to just how transformative it is knowing that I am in a community of people who care, who protect each other. My rent will not be, jacked up on me. I will not be kicked out without notice. That feeling of being able to exhale is a privilege, and it's something that we should be fighting for every person in our community to have access to as soon as possible. We don't have time to wait on it. We need to build new houses. The NDP has promised to build 500,000 houses over 10 years, but making sure 250,000 of those are built under 5 years, so it's not backloaded like the other plans that we see from other governments. We also want to crack down on rent evictions, the rent eviction that I faced and that many others face. By turning a profit in a quick time, you have taken what could have been an affordable unit from the market and turned it into another unaffordable unit and just exacerbated the system. And I don't blame the people doing this. You're being told to do this. Our culture with the flipping culture and our CMHC by not regulating these types of investments, these types of flips. So we need at a regulatory level to make sure these things aren't happening, because the market just isn't going to figure itself out when it's this wild. My final thing that I'd like to say is that I'm proud that I can work with Laura May Lindo, who's the provincial MPP in this riding. She and I are very good colleagues, and we've already talked about how we can work on getting housing options into our community faster. So that's doing politics differently. It's approaching it not as a, oh, that's provincial, oh, that's federal, and like not my business, but how can we collaborate and make sure we deliver results for our community? not later, not, discussions, no more questions. We need to act. Now's the time for us to act.
Okay, thank you. Mike, was there anything you wanted to respond to?
Well, if I can just pick up on that, I don't feel that that's actually doing politics differently. I feel like that's actually more of the same. It's a party working with others across their party, as we're always used to. It's various parties making promises that—
I wouldn't say that we're used to this happening in Kitchener Centre. I would say this is actually a really new opportunity for Kitchener Centre to have progressive representation at both levels of government. I wouldn't say that's politics as usual. I'd say that's exciting for a lot of people.
We'll let Mike finish his thought too.
Yeah. Again, so the point I'm making is that we're used to seeing people within the same party saying, here's our plan, here's our promise, here's the number of houses we're going to build, and we're only going to do it if it's our name that's on the bill. No. And I think it's just really critical to recognize that if we focus on democracy instead of politics, what we actually will have is MPs in Ottawa who are working together to find ways to work across party lines. This is an example of what we've seen from other Green MPs across the country, Mike Schreiner in Guelph being one recent example, where we can actually have an outsized impact if we turn down what color someone is a party of, and rather just focus on getting it done, on getting housing solutions, getting investments for our community, addressing the needs of those that are unsheltered, addressing the needs of those who are young folks who are leaving our community. A nurse I spoke with just a few days ago who's saying she's leaving for London because, again, her rent went up. So now we're losing healthcare workers on top of it. And so just to underscore that if we're going to do politics differently, that means moving beyond just working within people in our own parties and actually working with MPs across the House of Commons to ensure we deliver investments and progress for people in Kitchener Centre that are neighbors of ours that have been waiting for far too long on units of housing that have been spoken about for years and years.
But there is no plan for the Green Party to do that. And I can't let that go unresponded. I'm proud of the team that I'm running with. I'm proud of Leah Gazan. I'm proud of the fact that we have members of parliament that are actually doing the work of pushing forward progressive legislation. I want to join them, and I have no shame in that. When I knock on voters' doors, they'll tell me they're voting NDP before they know who I am. We have support in the community because people want change now. They don't want theoretical change. They don't want you to talk to the same people that have been promising and not delivering on change for the last 20 years. They want new voices actually making those decisions. So while you say that this is politics as usual, Mike, I'm really sorry, but you're talking about a Black member of provincial parliament and a Palestinian member of parliament. You can't tell us that we would do politics the same way it's always been done because you've never seen what we could do together.
Quickly, Mike, because we do have to move on to the next question here, please.
Just to clarify, the point I was making was around people working within their same parties. And that's what I think we need to be seeing more of, moving past working within the same party and just seeing MPs going to Ottawa to work with anyone who's willing to say, this is a priority for our community. We need to make progress on it. So just thanks for the chance to clarify there, James.
Thank you. We'll move on to the next question. What measures do you propose to assist local technology companies? And Bisan, we'll start with you on that question.
Sorry, could you please repeat the question?
Absolutely, yeah. What measures do you propose to assist local technology companies?
Oh, great. Yeah, so I used to be the community relations manager at Communitech, and I know very well the challenges that local tech startups are facing when it comes to scaling, developing new tech, creating partnerships, trying to commercialize, trying to take their product overseas. And so we know that there are a lot of barriers just built within the system just by hearing from you. I think one of the things that I kind of want to talk about is just how entrepreneurial this community is and just how effective having a community-centered hub like Communitech was for creating a really, really vibrant tech ecosystem here. What that turned into is a lot of different accelerator hubs all across the country following similar models, bringing in people who wanted to become entrepreneurs, but didn't have skills or the tools or the networks or the connections, and giving them those and helping them commercialize and productize and get on market. So we've seen that model, and that model has scaled. What the NDP wants to do is take that and put that all over the country. We want to make sure that there are avenues to entrepreneurship that are everywhere in this country. That also means that the skills and the knowledge base that we have here becomes even more valuable and more like required of an expertise in order to do that across the country. So we only grow our access to new resources, new kinds of partnerships, new multilateral connections through advocating for that kind of growth and being leaders and champions for that growth. When I worked at Communitech, we also talked about tech for good, how tech can be a force for positive change in the world. And I really think that that comes from an inclusive and equitable system that understands that if you don't see the use cases as they are, if you don't know what the product implications or maybe what the unforeseen implications of the work you're doing in tech are, these are the causes of a lot of now social problems that we're facing when it comes to misinformation and disinformation. So I'm so proud that this community is a part of Tech for Good and making sure that we are contributing in positive ways. So I would definitely want to focus on that and accelerate those types of initiatives. The third thing I mentioned earlier in the small business portion of my answers, but we know how hard it is to get your product overseas. So just making sure even that you have a dedicated point of contact that can walk you through all of those ropes. Dealing with the government is sometimes very, very opaque. And it is our responsibility to make sure that small business owners have all the tools that they need at their fingertips, because this helps everybody. I'm also coming from a situation as a small business owner where I recognize that there's going to be a lot more of us going forward. I look at a lot of my millennial and Gen Z friends, and we are all on the side hustle. Now, what we want to do is make sure that we have a safety net so that people can actually be able to spend years developing these ideas and have a bit of a comfort net so that we can encourage innovation, encourage that kind of new research and new ideas coming into our market. So by building our social safety net, by ensuring that everyone can afford the rent, by ensuring that you can access transportation, you can make sure that if you have a health crisis or if you need dental care, that you will be okay. The stress off of you to actually just focus on the problem you're trying to solve is so much bigger. The final thing, though, that we really need to make sure is that we are encouraging the best talent in the world to both be developed here as well as brought over here, and we need to retain them. So that means that not only are we focusing on our community and the vibrancy of our community, but we're focusing on how we're bringing and recruiting new talent. So definitely focusing on making sure that our local educational institutions are receiving the attention and the resources that they deserve, while also making sure that we are broadcasting exactly what is happening here and why now is the time for you to join the Canadian, but most specifically KW Tech region, and really kind of have this be your home. We have a really, really great case that we're making for talent to come over. We just need a little bit more support from the federal government to make sure that we get everything that we need here.
Thank you, Bisan. And Mike, same question for you. What measures do you propose to assist local technology companies?
Well, again, start by recognizing this is something our community is good at and has been for some time because of the leadership of so many organizations dating back to CTT years ago, to Communitech, and the Chamber included as well. When I was coming out of university, I was writing a business plan myself, concerned around the climate crisis and wanting to, recognizing that our community is one that always takes a leadership role and felt like the politicians weren't doing enough. And so let's work with businesses locally and support them in both saving money and reducing their emissions at the same time. And with the support of organizations like Communitech and others right across our community, within 5 years, started and scaled the local social enterprise, Sustainable Waterloo Region, whose goal it was and ended up, supporting businesses both to reduce their emissions and also to be leaders in the clean economy of the future. So much so that then other communities across the country started coming to us asking for the model. And so then started Green Economy Canada following that to coach and support other nonprofit leaders and communities across the country. And then most recently, having been back at Laurier as their social entrepreneur in residence, it was my role to be coaching and supporting students at Laurier as they're writing their own business plans, whether it was for a tech company or for a social enterprise, helping them think through the budgets and the marketing plans to actually make it happen. And so we recognize that that is a strength of our community. And also there's a lot more that we can do. We can do more when it comes to investing in R&D spending federally, and that by investing in that R&D spending, that's what local tech firms, whether it's companies like MyoVision or others across our community that need that upfront capital. But also one of the gaps we have in our community is for small scale startups that are more than the 50,000, but less than the 250 of a first round of funding, that there's a small handful of funding options for them. And so, having heard that as a concern in our community, wanting to advocate federally to close the gap on a concern of that kind, while also recognizing that, again, the green economy of the future is growing faster than the rest of the economy is. Our community has already, through the support of Sustainable Waterloo Region and others, emerged as a real leader. And we're seeing more and more startups coming out of our community that we need to be ensuring we invest in those kinds of firms that are going to be, again, the kind of clean economy leaders of the future, wanting to ensure that we find the investments for them to really scale up, recognizing that whether it's around retrofitting buildings or new EV technology, or whether it's around electrifying transit, in all of these cases, we know that so much of that technology often starts here and often has been the case in the past, isn't purchased locally. Some of their first deals are often in the States. And so wanting to then also be that advocate to ensure that we support our startups and our technology firms, that their first deals should be local, they should be in Canada, and that we need an advocate to be ensuring that that's actually the case.
Thanks, Mike. On to the next question. What are your plans to grow an environmentally sustainable economy across Waterloo Region? And Mike, we'll start with you on that question.
Didn't know that was the question to follow. I feel like we started into that one already, James, but certainly it starts by ensuring there is a network and a community of practice. And that's exactly what I actually spent 10 years doing, that, connecting businesses across our community, some of which in traditional sectors like insurance and manufacturing, others in clean tech specifically, to ensure that we create the opportunity around the green jobs of the future. And this is, again, these are the kind of trades jobs we're going to need, the kind of work it's going to need, and the retraining and the scaling up of, when it comes to ensuring those retrofits can happen and the tradespeople that are going to be required to do that. When it comes to a manufacturing shift we can see in our economy. And so if we were to have leadership at the federal level that was thinking, maybe instead of the 18 billion we're giving to fossil fuel companies every year and the billions we're spending in adding new pipeline infrastructure, that's the kind of funding that we could reallocate towards scaling up the kind of firms that I've been speaking about, that I've been working with for over a decade, and that we know our community is so ideally situated, having already shown leadership on this. Canada's first ever net energy positive multi-tenant building was one that was, in a business plan back at Sustainable Waterloo Region, almost 10 years ago now. Now it's at the David Johnston Research and Tech Park. It's called Evolve One. And at Evolve One there's actually kind of a space for these conversations to start, to be able to add the kind of federal funding to get, Evolve 2 that's been spoken about off the ground, to provide that same incubator type space. That's the kind of supports that, having had that personal experience, I know is exactly what we need to grow the low carbon economy locally and across the country.
Thank you, Mike. Bisan, same question for you. What are your plans to grow an environmentally sustainable economy across Waterloo region?
Unfortunately, not unfortunately, fortunately, Waterloo region is part of a larger economy and larger investments across the country. So when we talk about, a green economy, we're talking about beyond Waterloo region. We're talking about how millions of jobs in Canada will be created. And that's really where I want to kind of take it, because we're running for members of parliament. So from the federal perspective, we won't get conversations happening at the local level that will affect federal conversations until we have someone at the table that is making sure that those needs or those experiences or those expertise are being heard, right? And I guess I struggle to find the path other than this, because I'm talking to so many young people and they are desperate. They are desperate for hope, for a future. They don't see even themselves or the world existing long enough. There's anxiety and serious grief in youth because of the state of our climate. I feel urgency to act on their behalf. And I think that we have a solution in the NDP that's not only a great solution, but that we can get done. We can actually act on these things. And it's not complicated. It's called, as 3 words, called the Green New Deal. And it is creating green jobs all over the country, jobs that are tied to stopping climate change, to renewable and clean energy, to decarbonization. Those are the jobs, those are the working positions that we need to be investing in as a community, as a country. So we need federal leadership investing in green infrastructure, green projects, and the jobs and the impact that will have on our community will be immeasurable. But it has to come from that federal level. There has to be buy-in at the federal level, because that is where these decisions are made. So I will take what I'm hearing from everybody here in Waterloo region that is so concerned about our changing climate, about our emissions. And I won't, try and work with the people who bought us a pipeline. I will try and push and fight them to make sure that we are focusing on this existential issue. We have to actually act now. There has been a lot of talking, Tyler, the clock is ticking. And so we need to look at what are the tools that we have right in front of us, and tying, our shift from fossil fuels, ending fossil fuel subsidies, and moving into an actually clean and decarbonized economy for Canada is also the solution for Waterloo region, because we are actually looking at global solutions, and they have to be global solutions in order for them to work.
Thank you. What is the priority infrastructure project for Waterloo region? And Bisan, we'll start with you on that answer.
Definitely. I mean, for me, it's housing. Housing is the most crucial and most, urgently needed infrastructure in this riding. We could be looking at all the different ways that housing could be appearing, not just necessarily affordable TAP builds, but if we're looking at transitional, shelter, cooperative, different types of investment within the community to create long-standing affordable units, permanent affordable units that will actually also create jobs for those who are building them. We also need to be talking about, well, now that Greyhound has stopped and Metrolink and the two-way all-day go is still up in the air, we need to be talking about transit and clean transit and how we're investing in a more like a carbon neutral future. By the year 2030, we want to go on zero emission vehicles doing public transportation in Canada. That is the NDP's plan. We are also looking at figuring out how we will go from just the infrastructure of like housing and roads and look at how green infrastructure can be built here in our region. So where are we investing in green technology, developments, whether it is producing more solar energy, wind energy, but really looking at transitioning into a cleaner economy through creating these jobs for people to actually contribute in that way. The thing about tying our infrastructure and making sure that our infrastructure is leading to quality employment is, to me, the most important part. We need to make sure that when we are creating these kinds of investments from the government, that we're not losing the opportunity of also tying them to well-paying jobs that will actually get workers back in the economy, and really make sure that we have rebounded and that we are investing properly as we go forward from this pandemic.
Thank you. Mike, same question. What is a priority infrastructure project for Waterloo Region?
So as you've heard, folks wouldn't be surprised to hear me talk about housing. And so I feel like I've spoken about that enough. So I'll answer your question, James, specifically. It's transit, it's transportation. We need to ensure that we build the transportation infrastructure that allows for someone who might be considering buying a single occupancy vehicle, just buying a regular car and saying, you know what, it's actually cheaper and it's more convenient for me to hop on a rapid bus line to LRT, to then to a high-speed rail link, whether it's to Guelph, to Toronto. These are the kinds of investments that specifically, having, I'm sure many of us have done the 3-hour trip, whether it was on the Greyhound before or on Go Now, stopping through Square One. It's just an unacceptable. And again, the Chamber's been fantastic alongside Communitech. The whole Connect the Corridor campaign has been so pivotal to be advocating. And the fact is, though, that we're running out of time. And out of time for all the talk and promises and all the rest, out of time to be looking at building another lane as we try to talk about how we connect, Kitchener to Guelph, for example. These are the kinds of investments that from an infrastructure point of view, let's skip ahead. We know the studies have been done on high-speed rail already. We know those are the jobs of the future that we want to be creating. And those are the kinds of investments, as a specific example, even the downtown cycling grid, it's taking many more years to get built because there's not the federal dollars behind it to back up the money that the city of Kitchener has already put forward for it. And so if we were to then rethink about, okay, ensuring someone has a safe and accessible way to, whether it's cycling to a bus route that, is so often you don't even have to check the schedule for it, to then get you to Victoria and King, to then hop on to a high-speed rail link to Toronto or to Guelph, all of a sudden the person will say, I don't need to buy a car. It's actually, not worrying about the insurance, whether it's the cost or the inconvenience, that we build the transportation infrastructure we need. And then again, with the intersection with housing, that if we then also build the kind of housing that is deeply affordable and dignified and accessible to transit, well, now you're building the kind of 15-minute cities that can connect people in a convenient, low emission, and actually higher productivity for those of us that have been able to then be, on a laptop on the way from Kitchener to Toronto. We know these are the things that are possible, and that as our MP, to be, again, working across party lines to say, why hasn't it already been done? Working respectfully with others to understand some of those rebuttals and work with them to then say, well, here's another way to be an advocate to push for that kind of transportation infrastructure that we know that we need.
I just like to really quickly, just from my experience, I've never owned a car. I have never had that ability. I have always been a pedestrian, but I realize that is a privilege. And we need to understand that not every person has the privilege to be able to use active transportation. And so we need to also be thinking about how we're transitioning from dirty cars into clean cars. The NDP has a plan to rebate up to $15,000 of a made in Canada e-vehicle, zero emission vehicle when purchased. So we actually can recognize that as much as I want to be, very much living the lifestyle of a no car lifestyle, that's just not an opportunity for everyone.
Thank you. We'll move on to the next question. So how can Waterloo Region assist on reconciliation with Canada's Indigenous people? And Mike, we'll begin with you on that question.
We must start by recognizing the need to listen to Indigenous community members and leaders. They've been sharing the path forward, dating back to the Royal Commission back in 1996. Whether we look at the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, where the TRC made clear the 94 calls to action, of which we've only done 13. Missing the 4 related to missing and unmarked children and graves. This is the reality of not having had leadership that's been listening to Indigenous leaders and following through. When it comes to the boil water advisories, this is just completely unacceptable that people in this country don't have access to clean drinking water. And having spent the time to be listening to and learning from and in relationship with Indigenous leaders in our community, as the MP for Kitchener Centre, if we're going to really move towards truth and reconciliation, it starts with not just centering those voices, but listening to those leaders and ensuring that we advocate alongside them to then actually follow through on so much of what we know should have been done years and years ago. And as the MP for Kitchener Centre, that's exactly what I would do.
Thank you. Bisan, same question. How can Waterloo Region assist on reconciliation with Canada's Indigenous people?
This is another issue that I've heard a lot of concern about at the doors, and I hear you. To many people, finding out about just the horror of what happened on residential school property, to the ongoing trauma that is being doled out by this state onto Indigenous people in Canada and also on reserve. Realizing that has really shaken a lot of the people that I know, but I think Canadians in general. So what do we do? How do we approach this problem? So first of all, listening is great, but it becomes very tiresome if you just keep talking and people keep listening and nothing changes. So what I want to kind of bring forward is what are changes and how can a change in the federal government be both demanded on your part as citizens, but also how can you track that? So the first thing I want to just kind of clarify is that when it comes to reconciliation, it is the role of the federal government to enact nation-to-nation negotiation with Indigenous people. So that means that at the ultimate level of responsibility, that is with your member of parliament. It's not with your member of provincial parliament, not with your mayor or city councillor. It stands with your MP. So making sure that we elect members of parliament who actually understand colonialism, aren't afraid to talk about colonialism, to call it out and to call out how harmful it has been. All of these things are really important in a member of parliament because we cannot even approach reconciliation. We cannot approach the idea of a nation-to-nation relationship between Canada and Indigenous peoples without standing at that level and looking at who's at the table and who's doing those negotiations. I am very honored to have 27 Indigenous members of parliament, future members of parliament in this caucus with me. And I know that their voices at the table are actually going to help shift the conversation when it comes to Canada decolonizing its ways in addressing Indigenous people and actually working towards reconciliation. We're the party that has promised we will stop suing Indigenous survivors in courts who just want access to their own records. We will be a part of ensuring that there is accountability. There is an external investigator and prosecutor brought in to look at what happened on residential schools. Indigenous people need closure. They need the truth before reconciliation is even going to be on the table for us. So unless we are going in there with more than just the intention of listening, with the intention of acting and changing and transforming and decolonizing ourselves, decolonizing our communities, we won't get there. I mean, we have gone this entire, I am ashamed, we've gone this entire conversation without recognizing that Kitchener Center is on Haldeman Tract territory. We are located 100% on land that was promised to the Haudenosaunee, to the Six Nations of the Grand River. And we have not, as a region, come to terms with our history and our accountability in that matter. We can't pretend that we are going to be these active agents and that we can listen from a perspective that we aren't accountable and we aren't responsible, and the action or the responsibility to act is on us to create opportunities that Indigenous people could look at the nation, at the government of Canada, and see even a valid partner for these conversations, because they don't see that right now. So we need to make sure that we are looking at this federal election as an actual responsibility to think about how we can bring voices to the table that will be advocating for Indigenous rights, but also for Canada's ethical and moral backbone, to actually say something happened that was wrong and it continues to happen. In order for us to stop it, we need truth, we need accountability, and then we can start working on justice and reconciliation. I believe that the NDP plan is the most in tandem with what I have been hearing from local Indigenous leaders. I know that with the leadership and with the guidance of Indigenous leaders like Leah Gazan and Romeo Saganash, who I worked with when I was 25, 26 years old, with our implementation of UNDRIP, with our ability to actually run Indigenous people across Canada who live in Canada to have a voice at the table. Those are the things, those are the actual measures of where we're moving along the scale when it comes to a more just and peaceful and equal relationship with Indigenous peoples in Canada.
Okay, thanks, Bizan. We are running short on time, so we will have to move on to closing remarks. So these closing remarks will begin in the reverse order from when we started. So Bizan, we'll start with you on the closing remarks here.
I would just like to thank everybody for, taking the time to listen. I know that this election campaign isn't coming at a convenient time to most of you. Maybe some of you yesterday got your kids into school and you're feeling nervous about that. Maybe you haven't had social interactions as much over the last little bit, and you're a little nervous when someone knocks on your door. But the reception that we've been hearing from the community keeps us going. Our team is so energized, and I'm so honored by the people who have joined us already and by the people who continue to consider us and consider the options available in front of them. I know how popular our party is. I know how functional and how effective our party can be in getting things done. If you look at the survey, the Liberals put forward $1,000 as though that could kick you through the pandemic. The NDP made them double it to $2,000. That's why people kept a roof over their heads. That is the kind of advocacy that we can keep doing in the House of Commons when you elect me as Kitchener Centre's next Member of Parliament.
Thank you, Bizan. Mike, for closing remarks.
Thanks, James. And my thanks as well to all those that are joining with us live and those that might be watching the recording afterwards. I want to also extend to those that are asking questions and my wanting to be present in the conversation. I've not been in the chat myself, but if folks would like to connect one-on-one with me, I would just love to have the chance to do that. You can head to my website. It's just mikemorris.ca. You'll see a green button that says schedule a call with Mike. Would be glad to have a follow-up conversation with you in the coming days. For my part, as the MP for Kitchener Centre, I think it's really important to underscore that as our MP, I'd be a voice for our community first and foremost. That I do think it's important that we have people in Ottawa that are working respectfully, that are working hard, that are working across party lines, and doing so without simply being a spokesperson for a political party, but instead a representative for our community first. And so we didn't get a direct question on climate, for example, today. We didn't get a chance to talk about that as much. We didn't get a chance to talk about the opioid epidemic as much. I know we're limited in time here, but we have to recognize that each of the big three political parties have spent a lot of their time simply opposing whatever the other one is for or against. So as an example, on the climate change, most recent climate change legislation, it's Bill C-12. There were 19 times that the NDP said they're going to scale back the kind of ambitious climate action that would have more closely followed the science. And in parties that have whipped votes, 99.5% of every vote in the House of Commons follows the party line. And so to me, this deep sense of partisanship is what fuels the rhetoric and the divisiveness, where you have people who seem to be more focused on representing their political parties than they are on representing their communities. And that's, as your MP in Kitchener Centre, I see that as putting our democracy first, politics second, working respectfully to make progress on what we had a chance to speak about this morning and so much more. And so again, we just welcome the chance to have that follow-up conversation with those that would like to. And really, my thanks also to the Chamber for creating this space. We've had, in the SNAP election, I think we had 14 debates last time. And in this case, between pandemic and timing, there's so much fewer. And so just my thanks also to the Chamber. I think it was 570 and a number of others that were part of organizing this. And again, to those that joined us for it. Democracy is a two-way street. And so while candidates can choose to be here, for you all to choose to make time to make part of it, whether it's now live or afterwards, I just really appreciate that. So thank you again.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Mike, for your closing remarks there. We do have to move on, Bizan. So on behalf of the Chamber and Rogers, I would like to thank all candidates for taking time from their excessively busy schedules to participate in this forum. If you are a resident of Kitchener Centre, the election date is rapidly approaching. So please ensure you're aware of your voting location. The Chamber and Rogers hope this forum has provided some relevant perspectives on issues of concern. Thank you and have a great day.